Mark Hopkinson had been released from prison on a marijuana possession charge in 1975. He came back to find his father in a dispute over water and land rights with the neighboring Roitz family. Mark and his father even beat up Frank Roitz and his pregnant daughter. But after a prosecutor that was chummy with Mark declined to press charges, the father and daughter turned to Vincent Vehar, an attorney that would become a thorn in the side of the Hopkinson family. Mark devised a plan to eliminate him and the lawsuit against him, as this involved a bomb that leveled his entire house and killed 3 people. Now that the police were closing in on Mark and his crew, the desperation to save his own skin led Mark to take some extreme measures. Welcome to history's biggest villains. If you haven't watched part 1, I advise you to watch part 1. It explains everything that happens because I'm starting right from where I ended part 1. So please watch part 1. The link will be in the description for part 1. Thanks. After the bombing, Mike fled to California, where he hoped to wait for the police activity to die down. Mark, however, was confident that the authorities wouldn't be able to tie him to the murder. He remained in Wyoming, eager to prove to police that he wasn't involved in the death of Vincent Vehar and his family. His little group of thugs would be disbanded soon as well. Weeks after the bombing, James was arrested on an unrelated charge of larceny and burglary. Seeking some sort of leverage, he told police about Kelly's murder, telling them that he could lead authorities to her body. He further confessed that Mike Hickey was the killer. James was promptly arrested and charged with the girl's murder. When Mike returned to Wyoming from California, he too was arrested and charged with the same crime. On the night of June 27, 1976, Mike had taken Kelly to a secluded spot where he was supposed to meet James. When James didn't show up, Mike struck Kelly in the head with a rock, killing her. He cut out her vagina to bring to James as proof of her death. Then he buried her remains. Mark was worried that Mike would implicate him in the murder of the Vehar family in order to gain legal leverage. To prevent this, he met with him in prison. If he kept quiet, Mark would arrange false statements from him and Jeff Green in order to pin Kelly's murder all on James and get him off the hook. At first, the ploy worked, and the murder charges against Mike were eventually dropped. For almost a year, Mark and Mike remained free, with police unaware of their connection to the Vehar murders. But all that would change once James went to trial, haunted by a guilty conscience. Jeff would soon spill the beans on Mark. This essentially signed his death warrant. Jeff finally broke down and told police that he, Mark, and Mike had lied in their testimony to implicate James in the murder. He told police it was in fact Mike who murdered Kelly. Furthermore, Jeff told police that he knew who had carried out the murder of the Vehar family the previous year. He told police that Mark had approached him and Mike about carrying out the bombing, but that it was Mike who actually did the deed. Although Jeff couldn't provide evidence that Mark actually ordered the bombing, he did tell police that Mark had personally asked him to put a bomb in the car of George Mariscal, a lawyer who owed him $10,000. George had actually been arrested in Arizona for carrying the bomb meant to kill Mariscal in 1976, but Mark bailed him out of jail before he could talk to police. As a result of his statements, Mike was arrested again and charged with first-degree murder for killing Kelly. Additionally, Mark was also arrested on charges of ordering the car bombing attempt on George Mariscal. In 1978, after Jeff testified against him, Mark was convicted of conspiracy for the attempted bombing and was sentenced to a maximum of 40 years. Police were also ready to charge him with ordering the murder of the Vehar family, and Jeff would testify against him in that trial as well. Mark was sent to a federal prison in Lompoc, California, following his conviction. He knew that his legal troubles were far from over, as it was likely that he would face the death penalty for the Vehar family bombing. But even while incarcerated, he had revenge on his mind. He was fuming over Jeff's testimony, so he chose to silence the young man once and for all. On the morning of May 20th, 1979, a man parked his car off a lonely road in Evanston to walk his dog. As he examined the area, he came across a horrifying sight. The nude, bloody, battered, and mutilated corpse of a young man lay just off the road, face down in the dirt, dead from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. In addition, his genitals had been mutilated by what appeared to be a hot poker. He had long slashes on his chest and arms that appeared to be from a large knife. Forensic examiners discovered over 150 burn marks all over his body, probably caused by a lit cigarette being pressed against his skin. The burn marks were so deep that they seared into the muscles. They had all been made hours before the man's death and were meant to cause the maximum amount of pain. There were deep burns on the skin behind his ears and along the bridge of his nose, burns all over the forehead and scalp, third-degree burns on the skin of the elbows, and burns on the knuckle joints and webbing of the hands. The man had also been blinded by a hot branding iron before he died. His left eye was completely burned out, and his right eye had suffered severe damage. Severe rope burns around his wrists showed that he was tied to a chair during the torture and had been desperately clinging to life for hours. The killers had also left a message with the burns. They were all in the shape of the letter T, for traitor. This was no ordinary murder. This was a ritualistic, gruesome killing that involved extensive torture. Whoever killed this man wanted him to suffer greatly before he died, increasing the severity of torture over a period of several hours. It had all the hallmarks of a mafia-style execution. Police soon identified the man as Jeff Green, the man who was talking to police about Mark, and who had been missing for the past 2 days. Coincidentally, Jeff's body was found just 2 days before he was set to testify before a grand jury about Mark's connection to the Vehar bombing. Police couldn't help but wonder if Mark had something to do with Jeff's death. There was a problem, however. He couldn't have committed the actual crime because he was locked up. If he had anything to do with Jeff's death, he would have ordered the murder from prison, where all communication with the outside world is heavily monitored. If Mark was behind the murder, he was able to not only order the hit, but could also tell the assassins what he looked like, where he was located, and that they should torture him in a certain way before killing him. Police knew that they had to do a lot of digging to find evidence to tie Mark to the crime. They searched the prison call logs and soon discovered that Mark was using the phone quite a bit in the weeks before Jeff's murder. Over a 51-day period from April to May 1979, Mark had made 114 calls from prison, several of them to Alvin Hap Russell, a roommate of his from Salt Lake City, Utah. Alvin visited his roommate in prison soon afterwards, but no one knows exactly what they discussed. He later claimed that Mark had asked him to produce perjured statements from witnesses for the upcoming Vehar trial, but police believed that he discussed killing Jeff and had asked Alvin if he knew anybody that could do it. Alvin was believed to have been a middleman relaying information between Mark and the killers of Jeff Green. Soon afterwards, Mark began calling Jennifer Larchick, an old high school friend of Jeff's. He asked her to send a picture of Jeff to him from her high school yearbook. She was confused. Why would he need a picture of Jeff? She sternly refused his request. Soon afterwards, Alvin met Jennifer at her home in person and asked her to give him Jeff's yearbook photo. Reluctantly, she agreed, and she sent him a cutout picture of Jeff. Early in May 1979, Mark called his ex-girlfriend, Christy King, and asked if she could hide some money away in a bank account for him. She was puzzled as to why he wanted to use her bank account, but she agreed. On May 16th, just 4 days before Jeff's body was found, Mark called her again, asking if she knew where he was. She said that she didn't, but that he was probably out of state. The next day, Mark called her again and asked the same question. She said that he was in Iowa attending a funeral, but that he would be home on the 18th. The same day that Jeff returned to Wyoming from Iowa, he disappeared, last seen in the company of 2 other people. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. On May 21st, just 1 day after Jeff's body was found, Christy received $15,000 in her bank account, which Mark asked her to hold on to for a while. The money had been sent to her by Scott Hopkinson, Mark's brother. Police now suspected that Mark had ordered the murder from prison and used Christy's bank account as a front to pay off the hitmen. Although the evidence against him was circumstantial, it was incredibly damning. The timing of the murder, Jeff's betrayal, the money changing, the phone calls, the yearbook photo, the mysterious meeting with the roommate, all roads led back to Mark Hopkinson. Police were convinced that he had ordered the murder as a part of a ploy to save his own neck. The one thing police didn't have were Jeff's killers. To this day, the hitmen who carried out the actual kidnapping, torture, and murder of Jeff Green have never been found. After hearing the news about Jeff, Mike immediately broke down and he went to the police. Frightened that Mark would kill him too, he confessed to murdering Kelly and to bombing the Vehar house. He told the police that he would testify against his boss in exchange for a lighter sentence. With this evidence, prosecutors charged Mark with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy for the murder of the Vehar family. In addition, he was charged with the murder of Jeff Green. On September 3rd, Mark finally went on trial. Despite the evidence against him, he maintained his innocence, pleading not guilty to all charges. In court, Mark faced off against Jerry Spence, a well-experienced lawyer who to this day has never lost a court case. For Spence, this one was personal though. He had known the Vehar family, and Vincent had been one of his closest friends. Spence intended to throw the metaphorical book at Mark. He not only wanted to see him convicted of all 4 murders, he wanted to make sure that he would be sent to Wyoming's gas chamber. Forever the pathological liar, Mark committed perjury numerous times during the trial and showed utter contempt and disregard for the court. He showed a vicious hatred for Jerry Spence, calling him a lying piece of shit and a charlatan, and referring to his case as manufactured bullshit. He also claimed that Mike was a liar, someone trying to frame him to save his own skin. In addition, he insisted that unless the prosecution could find Jeff's actual killers, there was no evidence that he had ordered the murder. The prosecution had 27 witnesses and over 300 pieces of evidence in their case. Among these was Jennifer's yearbook photos, with a picture of Jeff cut out on one of the pages. Jerry Spence told the jury that the evidence against Mark was circumstantial, but all they had to do was follow the money, put together the pieces, and they would all see that he was the one that ordered all the killings. However, once the prosecution rested their case, Mark chose not to offer any defense. He claimed he had said all he needed to say, and remarked, "The state hasn't proven anything." But the jury felt differently. On September 25th, After 7.5 hours of deliberation, they convicted Mark of 2 counts of conspiracy and all 4 counts of murder. He said nothing as each guilty verdict was read. He simply stared at the floor, silent and stone-faced. Next, the jury would deliberate whether to sentence him to life in prison or to death in the gas chamber. Charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, the death penalty applied to each count. Mark's defense was short. "I plead not guilty," he said, maintaining his innocence. "Whether or not they give me the death sentence, that's where I stand." During the penalty phase of the trial, Jerry Spence showed pictures of the burned, mutilated, and tortured body of Jeff Green. He described in excruciating detail the torture that the young man faced before he got killed. Spence's co-counsel, Ed Moriarty, also told the jury that Mark had his chance at redemption, but he posed too much of a danger to other people to be kept alive. "There comes a time," said Moriarty, "where rehabilitation is ineffective, where it won't do any good." He turned to face Mark and continued, "And we submit to you that under the facts and circumstances of this case, Mr. Hopkinson has had his chance, not only once, but twice proven, that the results have been disastrous. Sometimes, someplace, society has to defend itself." He closed by saying, "If this case isn't the proper case for the death penalty, then there are no proper cases for the death penalty anywhere in the world." On September 27th, after deliberating for 9.5 hours, the jury reached a verdict. For the murders of Vincent Vehar, Beverly Vehar, and John Vehar, Mark was sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the murder of Jeff Green, the jury sentenced him to die in Wyoming's gas chamber, making him the first person to be executed in Wyoming since the death penalty was reinstated just 2 years earlier. After dismissing the jury, the judge set Mark's execution date for midnight on October 27, 1979. This date was just a formality, though, as nobody expected his punishment to be carried out so soon. After his sentencing, he was led from the courtroom, whistling and joking with the guards on his way to death row at Wyoming State Penitentiary in Rawlins. Outside, when confronted by TV cameras, he maintained his innocence. Referring to Jeff, he told reporters, "Whether I die or not, I'll never be a whore. I'm innocent in this trial." Okay. Alvin Russell was later convicted for his role in ordering Jeff's murder, although authorities didn't believe that he carried out the killing himself. Russell was sentenced to life in prison and died from a heart attack while awaiting a retrial. As for Mike, his confession saved him from the maximum punishment, as he only received a 20-year sentence. He was released in 1999, and when last interviewed in 2011, he lived under an assumed name on a small ranch in the town of Lone Tree, Wyoming. As predicted, Mark's original execution date was automatically stayed to let him file appeals on his conviction. His appeal cited, among other things, the alleged unfairness of him being on death row, while Mike, the actual hitman, was only serving 20 years in prison. He continued to maintain his innocence, claiming that the authorities had to find the actual killers before they could accuse him of committing the murder. Despite these claims, Mark showed no remorse for the horrifying way that Jeff died. "It didn't bother me that the kid got killed," he said in a death row interview. "I can give you a list of people who would want to kill Jeff Green." But during a different interview, he said, "I just wish he wouldn't have gotten killed when he did. That looked bad for me." Mark also continued to show an intense hatred for Jerry Spence. "Everyone thinks I hate Jerry Spence. I don't," he said. "I like someone beyond reach." His comments might not have been a joke, though. There was plenty of evidence that even while on death row, Mark tried to order a hit on Jerry Spence, Frank Roitz, and other people he deemed a threat. He mailed dozens of threatening letters to Spence, in which he threatened to have him and his wife skinned alive. In 1981, it was further revealed that he offered a fellow prisoner on the brink of release over $800 to kill the entire Roitz family and burn down their house. The plot was stopped only because the prisoner chose to tell the police about Mark's offer. Later that year, Mark's appeal was heard by the Wyoming Supreme Court. In an unprecedented decision, the court ruled that his defense team had adequately supported him by not stepping in to offer their own arguments during the penalty phase. As a result, the court overturned his death sentence and remanded the case back for a new hearing. This time, his attorneys presented their own argument to the jury in an attempt to have Mark's death sentence commuted to life. But yet again, the jury reached the same verdict. On May 27, 1982, after 12 hours of deliberation, they sentenced him to death again. However, there was a problem. The state penitentiary in Rawlins had closed down the previous year, and along with it, the only gas chamber in Wyoming. There was now, in effect, no way for the state to carry out his sentence, as the new facility had no execution chamber. Because of this, his execution date was delayed for another year. Finally, in 1983, the Wyoming state legislature approved the use of lethal injection as a means of execution. Mark's third execution date was set for June 18, 1984, but that date was stayed to let him file further appeals. 2 more execution dates were set the following year, but he would avoid those as well. By this time, the general public was tired of the endless hearings and appeals. They wanted to put this whole horrible case behind them and put Mark to death. Even Jerry Spence was fed up. He told the court that if they weren't going to execute him, they should just commute his sentence to life and spare the cost of the appeals. Between 1986 and 1990, Mark had 5 more execution dates set for him, but he would avoid all of them. As in one particular case, he wanted to stay barely 48 hours before he was scheduled to die. As the court cycle continued, Mark maintained his innocence, and his attorneys worked tirelessly to file appeals and request a new trial. After more than a decade of runarounds and failed execution dates, Mark's final request for a new trial was denied. He received his final date, being scheduled to die by lethal injection on January 22, 1992. This would be Wyoming's first execution since 1965, and the state's first ever use of lethal injection. Shortly afterward, Mark appeared at a press conference at the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He spent most of the interview wallowing in self-pity and accusing Jerry Spence of fabricating the case against him to satisfy some sort of bloodlust. He told the reporters that regardless of what happened, his innocence would one day be proven, whether he lived or not. But despite his arrogant and overconfident attitude, it appeared that even he was losing hope that he would ever avoid execution. Mark's last chance was for the governor to commute his sentence. Backed by anti-death penalty groups like Amnesty International, he submitted a petition to Governor Mike Sullivan requesting clemency. The governor received letters from all over the world demanding that he commute Mark's sentence. They called the death penalty immoral, inhuman, and archaic, urging Sullivan to grant mercy to this remorseless killer. Even if he was guilty, they argued, executing him would be ethically wrong. However, Sullivan knew this case had been dragged on long enough. Mark's time was up, and it was time to put an end to the danger he posed to the world. Sullivan refused to commute his sentence, giving the go-ahead for the execution to proceed. On the afternoon of January 21, 1992, Mark was transferred to a holding cell in a secret location inside the prison. His time was finally up. Unlike most death row inmates who were usually somber and silent prior to their execution, Mark was energetic, restless, and chatty. When the guards asked him if they could get him anything, he jokingly responded, "Yeah, you could give me a blonde and a helicopter." At 2:30 p.m., he met with 4 clergymen and prayed with them. At 3:30, he ordered his last meal, a pizza and a fruit plate, sharing the meal with the members of his family. After meeting with his family and also knowing that he would die soon, Mark wanted to torment those he hated even in death. He asked prison officials to ensure that his body was cremated and requested that his ashes be scattered on Jerry Spence's driveway. At 9:30 p.m., Mark played checkers with one of the guards, and an hour later, he cheerfully played a game of pool with the warden, Dwayne Schillinger, who could barely keep his composure. Throughout the 13 years that Mark had been on death row, the warden had grown fond of him and considered him a close friend. Apart from his cheerful attitude, he barely managed to choke back tears while they played the game. Finally, at 12:10 a.m. on January 22nd, he left his holding cell for the last time. As he walked, he asked the warden to keep his hand on his shoulder. Turning to one of the guards, Mark said, "Hey, I'm sorry to put you through this." The team brought him to the execution chamber at 12:18 a.m. It was a converted holding cell, shaped like a triangle and illuminated by bright fluorescent lights. On one side, a glass window covered by a bluish-black curtain let witnesses see into the chamber. On the other side, perpendicular to the glass window, was a cement wall. The third side contained a grill-like mesh, behind which the executioners would inject the lethal drugs. Just in front of the mesh wall was a crew gurney, built by prison inmates. Mark hopped up on the gurney and laid down as the guard strapped his left arm to an extended armboard and secured his body to the bed. It's almost like he was unaware of the situation at hand, as Mark even helped the guards apply the restraints. As he lay on the gurney with a sheet pulled up to his chin, Mark looked at the warden and said, "You know, Spence should be on this gurney instead of me. He once said I could kill him from the grave, so you know he's going to have something to worry about. You got the wrong guy." As medical technicians inserted 2 IV tubes into his left arm, he declared, "They have killed an innocent man." Although he selected several witnesses for his execution, he changed his mind at the last minute, so there were no official witnesses present when he was put to death. Instead, Mark had written a final statement that he wanted to be read to the witnesses, which read, "Jerry Spence is a lying, manipulative piece of shit. I feel sorry for the Vehar family, but you got the wrong man." Just before he would die, Mark managed to crack another joke. "You know, Warden, we need a faster way to do this. I think I'd rather be shot. That's it. Let someone shoot me." He then looked up at Schillinger, who was standing over him. "You tell the press what my last words were," he said. The warden's eyes filled with tears. "Hey, don't get weak on me, Warden. I'm holding up good here. If you start, I know I will. You let the whole damn world and all these news people know that Mark Hopkinson was strong and tight to the end. Help me do this, Warden." At 12:35 a.m., the first drug was injected. Sodium thiopental, a powerful sedative. The drugs began to flow down the long, clear IV tube into his left arm. The effect was immediate. Mark leaned his head back and stared up at the lights on the ceiling. "Well, Warden, I feel it in my system," he said, still strapped to the gurney. "I'll see." He suddenly stopped mid-sentence as the drug took effect. Mark closed his eyes, exhaled once, and went completely still. 5 minutes after Mark was sedated, the second drug was injected, pancuronium bromide, to collapse his lungs. His lips turned a tinge of blue as his breathing slowed. His face turned red as his body became rigid. Finally, at 12:44 a.m., the third drug, potassium chloride, was injected to stop the heart. Mark lay still as his face turned from a bright red color to a deathly gray, and the EKG machine flatlined. At 12:57 a.m. on January 22, 1992, Mark Allen Hopkinson was formally pronounced dead. To this day, he remains the last person executed by the state of Wyoming. Man, that was a story, man. That was a freaking story. This dude was a freaking psychopath. To the day he died, he's still vengeful. He's still just hateful. He still wants to kill Jerry. He's still just, oh, I was tough. I'm a tough guy to the day. Like, thank you for watching. I really appreciate y'all for the support. I really appreciate y'all. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Please be safe. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.